I'm Scott Gration, and I'm really happy to be with you today to share some of my experiences. I've been an ambassador to Kenya, the special envoy to Sudan, and I completed a 32-year military career flying fighters and working as a senior officer in the United States Air Force. Today, we're going to talk about the importance of figuring out what are the right things and doing them. And then we're going to figure out how to get style points by doing those right things right. Finally, we're going to figure out what do you do when doing the right things just doesn't work and you get hammered. It happened to me. Stand by for more.
Welcome back, friends, fans, and fellow aficionados of leadership excellence. This is Darv Baron. I am the Dragonist, and I'm your host here at the Leadership and Loyalty podcast for executives, for Fortune 500 executives. This is part 2 of our episode with retired Major General Scott Gration, who is also a previously an ambassador to Kenya and special US envoy to the Sudan. We've been talking about being a warrior diplomat. At the beginning of the show, we've covered so many wonderful things, and I wanted to make this a 2-part because this is a guy with experience of being a leader that is, to say the least, unique. His perspective is unique, and his insights around what it takes to really be a servant leader at the highest possible level is really quite outstanding. Early on, we talked about his work going to Uganda. We talked about him serving. We've talked about him having a near-death experience and what that brought him back to. And then we started talking about his book, Flight Path, The Son of Africa to Warrior-Diplomat. And we talked about that it was there to remind leaders about what is important and how to actually know the difference between doing the right thing and what is right. And we talked about that this book is based on 12 stories and leadership lessons. I want to jump back in at that point because that's kind of where we left it off, because we've talked about Scott meeting leaders and working with incredible leaders. But I want to just sort of dive in a little bit, Scott. I want to welcome you back, and I want to dive into this piece around the 12 lessons. And let's just sort of pick a couple out that we're going to go after. Of course, you've mentioned a lot about integrity and being a servant leader and family. What else do you want to sort of really have us grasp of these 12 lessons?
I think you have to have a strategic framework if you're a leader. You know, it really starts with having a very clear vision of your organization, what you're trying to do. And every time I became a wing commander or a group commander or was in charge of a big wing, I actually would go away and sit down and write no longer than about 6 words what the vision of the wing would be. And I'd try to pick out those powerful words that would describe the level of performance and who would do it. And you got to have that thing that people can remember. And like in Elmendorf, it was to become the world's premier air power wing. I mean, it was something small like that, but everything was hinged to that. And then underneath that, come up with strategic statements of things that have to be accomplished to get you there in terms of equipping and training and all that kind of stuff.
So I've got the vision statement piece, right?
Yeah.
Which you're saying is this sort of 6 word. But how did you design the strategic path to that? Because, you know, we all see those vision statements on the wall or the mission statements on the wall, and really, who cares? Because they don't really mean much to anybody, because A, they don't have a deep enough why emotional connection. And on the other side, they don't have enough strategic power. How do you design, or how did you recommend that we design those things?
Well, let me take another example that's probably easier to see. When I became the ambassador in Kenya, I found out that we were losing a mom every 23 hours. We were losing a child, a Kenyan child, under 5 every 4 minutes, a baby every 20 minutes. And I saw that the healthcare was just terrible. And so I started asking questions about it, and I figured out that after being briefed, that 63% of the people were born outside of a hospital and that they didn't have prenatal care. And so we decided we were going to cut the excess mortality rates by 50%. And so we ended up saying, how do you do that? Well, we came up with 4 things that we could attack. And one was moms and kids. Another one was things like breast cancer, cervical cancer, and that kind of thing. And we figured out what the standard was that we were trying to achieve, and then who would do it and how we would make this happen. Then non-communicable diseases that we needed to cut down. And so we walked through and we had 4 areas that we were going to focus on. And by the time, so we had our vision statement, we had a mission statement, we had the strategic key tasks, and then we had mission essential tasks that we had to fill out. It was in the end about 60 pages of work, but it was very clear that if you did the mission essential tasks, then your strategic tasks would be accomplished, and then you would accomplish your mission and vision. So it's a building block approach, but that rigor is absolutely critical to do it. We did the same thing when I was in a flying wing. It had to do with maintenance, it had to do with pilot training, it had to do with a lot of different things, but we broke out what are those key tasks that we had to accomplish to make the mission happen. And it takes a little bit of effort, but once you do that, you get everybody working the same way. Everybody has a niche. Everybody has something that they accomplish. And when they do it, it all fits in and they can see that they're making a difference. And I think that's the beautiful thing about taking the time to make a strategic plan is that when it's done, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. And if they do it, they can look back with great satisfaction that they had a part in making a difference. And especially millennials, but even us old timers, we want to know that at the end of the day, that our life was worth it. Our labors made a difference and the world is a better place because we were here. And it doesn't happen by just coming into work and pushing pencils around and reorganizing numbers. It's got to have, and that's what leaders do.
Yeah.
Leaders create that strategic vision, the strategic statements, and they organize the mission so that people know where they're going, what they have to accomplish, and when they have to have it done by. And if you can just break those things out, I tell you, your organization will flourish and you'll make a lot of money and you'll just have fun doing it. It's a great exercise, but it's something that I learned and something that I've practiced and something that I encourage other leaders to do.
Now, there's something there for me that I find interesting about you, particularly as a leader, because obviously you're driven. I mean, you keep bringing it up. It's about making a difference. It's about being of service, and all that's important. And at the same time, you've been in the line of command where you've been the commander, you've been the person leading, and you've also been the person receiving the order from above. And you talked about this making a difference, and I have met leaders who are like, yeah, it doesn't really matter because it doesn't really make a difference in the long run, right? I disagree with that, but I understand it. So places like the Sudan, which you talked about earlier in part 1 of the show, we know that what's going on in Ethiopia as we record this, Ethiopia, there's all kinds of horrific things happening there. People are moving into the Sudan, the border problems. We've got all these kinds of things, and those kinds of people can look and go, didn't really make any difference, did it, Scott? Didn't really change anything, because these people are still, very tribal, and trying to lay out coups and all these kinds of things. What do you say to that when I mean, what's it, first of all, not only what do you say to that, but what's it feel like for you when you look back and you see these places that you've tried to make a difference in, and yet they fall back into these horrible situations?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I had to live through this a lot of ways and a lot of times. the bottom line is we're not called uh, to have achievement. We're called to set up the process and do your best to try to make it happen. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that a lot of times we get so mixed up in getting a grade,
Mm-hmm.
and when it's the process that sometimes is more important, and we sort of miss what happened in the process. There's also another downfall, Doug, that I got to be honest about. When I put into place this program in Kenya,
Mm-hmm.
it was very hard for the State Department and for the Office of Global Health, who had a way of measuring progress. And their measurement of progress was how much money do you give away? How many buildings do you build? How many volunteer testing and counseling centers do you make? And so what was happening is that in a 3 mile period, we had 4 volunteer counseling and testing centers because people got $2,000 for building this house. Nobody came to them, but we
No.
had all these facilities being built and we had money being given away. And I said, listen, I don't care about output. We're not going to measure ourselves with output. We're going to measure ourselves with outcome. And if you can't show me that we've made a difference, that we've made progress toward our strategic goals and the mission, I don't want to do it. And so what happened is the first year that I refused to give money away unless they could show me that there was an outcome associated with this, we didn't spend our budget.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, the 30th of September came and they said, you failed because you didn't obligate all your funds.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't really care because we couldn't find enough programs yet where we could get an outcome for spending this money. Well, this sent Washington up the proverbial flagpole. And I ended up making some enemies. And I ended up, it eventually came to my downfall as ambassador because I was seen as an obstructionist. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw myself as somebody who was trying to make a difference by prioritizing outcomes over outputs. And it didn't matter to me how much money was reallocated and all that kind of stuff. In fact, it's strange. I went to a place where they'd gotten $8 million. They had
Mm-hmm.
had 26 people in their program, and they didn't know where a single person was when I asked them, where is that person now? And to me, I almost cried because those people had buildings, they had cars, they had everything. They certainly had achieved output, but they had zero when it came to outcome. And I never want to be associated with a program that doesn't have an outcome that is measurable and that makes a difference to the community. I
But
don't
that
care how much money is spent.
but that's an important part of your leadership model and what you are teaching businesses and leaders is the understanding that oftentimes we may have the wrong metrics. We likely have the wrong metrics. We're measuring the things that ultimately don't matter but look good on paper. I mean, if we as an organization, whatever that organization might be, give away $10 million, everybody's like, oh my goodness, that's so great.
Mhm.
Right. But do you look beneath the covers to see what happened to it and where it was spent and how it was spent? And that oversight, which is so important, is so often missed because it's just like, oh, well, look at what we did. Yeah, you gave a bunch away. So what? If you gave it away and it ended up in somebody's pocket and nothing really changed in the community, that's not really a difference. So I love that you are teaching leaders about this understanding of, maybe re-examining the metrics. I want to come to something that is, for me, is important, at least, because it's in the title of your book. It's this very interesting position because you were a warrior. You were a fighter pilot. Um, you've been a diplomat, which seems to be in many ways the opposite to a warrior, or supposedly the opposite to being a warrior. You have done a lot of this humanitarian work, enormous amounts of humanitarian work. You At the same time, you described having survived the 1996 towers bombing in Saudi Arabia. You were involved with the developing, I believe you were involved with the developing of the Predator drone and the 2003 Scud missile hunt in Iraq. Talk to us about these, it seems like, juxtaposition.
Well, first of all, let me just say that it was an honor to be in all those places, even though some of them were not fun. I was in Cobra Towers when that bomb went off,
Mm-hmm.
and 19 of the people that were killed, 18 of them worked for me, and it really goes to show you that
Wow.
freedom's not free, and that people do make commitments, and they serve our country, and they preserve our peace. They guarantee our flag will fly in freedom, and there's a cost associated to this. I was in the Pentagon a few hundred yards from where that airplane hit, and I saw it again. I saw people responding and doing the right thing. And so these are tough things to live through, and being a warrior has its risks. And but I wouldn't trade a minute of being a fighter pilot and doing all those things that I got to do every day. But being a diplomat's also tough, and walking the line between the two is also tough. And I think it's time for us to be very honest that I wasn't successful in blending the two mindsets. And some of it I'll take credit for, because I was brought up learning how to take a hill. You know, if I was told to get a job done, I got it done. And it wasn't about meeting. And what I found out that I like to make a decision with 70, sometimes 60% of the information. And then if I need to adjust, I will. But if I have a vector that I think is the right direction, I'll move out smartly. I found out in the State Department that, you know, it takes 98% and you're still going to keep having meetings and talking about it until you get to the 100. And I wasn't willing to wait around for that extra 5% and sometimes 2% to move out smartly. And this was tough, because leadership is not only about doing the right thing, but it's about your style points. We get graded on not only technical difficulty, but also on style points. And I probably lost it a little bit in style points, because I knew that people were dying and we needed to make a difference, and we needed to spend our money in a different way. And every day we sat around was another lady that died in childbirth, and another baby that died from bad water or from malaria or chest issues. I just couldn't do it. And so I pushed really hard. And sometimes when you push really hard, the system pushes back. And that's sort of the last point. When you're doing the right things, right, sometimes everything goes wrong. And then what do? I tell you what, I walked in, they sent out an inspector general to look at my emails and stuff. It was all trumped up charges, and I was exonerated 3 months later. But by then I'd already lost my job, and I was bitter. I knew that I had so much to offer. I spoke Swahili. I knew the country. I knew the people. I knew what needed to be done, and I was on track to do it. And I was told to take a time out.
Because
Because people, you know, I had offended some people, and they said that I was using my email to push classified information, which of course, as a
you're
general for
exonerated from.
years, I gave them my computer. I said, this is not even my computer, it's a State Department computer. And of course they found nothing. And of course it was, you know, I ended up being exonerated. But again, that comes down to integrity. If you do what's right when no one's looking, it's not going to matter when they start looking. And so I ended up losing my job. But what I'm trying to get to is that I went through anger and everything else, and I tried to defend myself, but in the end, I had to forgive. And I was used to forgiving when my sister would come up when I was a kid and say, I'm sorry. And they say, yeah, I forgive you. And we move on. But this is the first time nobody was sorry. The system was still believing that I bucked too hard and that I tried too hard and that kind of thing. And I learned that sometimes you just have to say, I forgive you, and move on. It's like cutting an anchor. The anchor still stays caught in those shoals, but your boat can go to a different location. And for 2 years, I ran around with my anchor stuck on those shoals,
Mm-hmm.
bitter, angry, depressed, drinking poison, hoping that other people would die. It was messing my life up until I was able to move on. And I think one of the big lessons that leaders have to take from this is that there sometimes comes a time when you've done your best, you've done everything right that you know how to do, and you've done it with style points, and you still lose. At
Right.
that point, you got to come to grips with yourself and walk away from it. And that's very hard. And it happens in marriages, it happens in business, it happens in political relationships, but you have to cut the anchor and move on. And that's an important lesson that I hope people get out of this. You know, it goes back to St. Francis of Assisi saying, in pardoning we are pardoned. And it may sound trite, but that prayer was written for me 800 years ago, and
Sure.
it's still valid today. There are times that you have to forgive and move on, even when it wasn't your mistake, even when you were exonerated for whatever happened. Uh, you just have to take and bite the bullet. And that's hard for leaders who have believed that they were the best, have believed they were doing good work, and it didn't work out. And
What you
and
said there for me is
uh,
so important. And so I want to sort of have it register for everybody. It's one thing to have somebody make a mistake, apologize, and you forgive them. It's a whole other thing for when somebody has done you wrong, does not ask for forgiveness, does not say sorry, is
mm,
maybe not even accountable. And then the choice is on you to forgive them, even though you will probably still be remembered as the bad guy, even though you did nothing wrong. How did you get to that, Scott? Because I've certainly met CEOs and leaders in other capacities who said, you know what, they really shit on me. I did good things for them, and I'm not living in that person's skin, or in that person's mind. I don't know the 100% truth, but I'm pretty sure that this is really a good person who did good things, who got thrown under the bus, who, as you said, is drinking their own poison, but just doesn't know how to stop doing that because it just feels so overwhelming, and of course, then it poisons their attitude about other people. The lack of trust takes place, and it gets projected into other situations, maybe where it's not necessary. How did you get to that? Because you said you walked around for a couple of years, right?
oh, I
Feeling
did.
right.
Yeah, it was very tough, and it clouded everything that I did. You know, I just it was like looking through these glasses, and everything that I saw, even the beautiful things, were no longer beautiful. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really tough, and it really took a toll, even physically, on me, and certainly emotionally, and probably my family. And Dov, I'm not saying it wasn't all my fault. I did things that I probably acted like a general when I should have been like a diplomat, and I know that I brought some of this on myself by not understanding the different mindsets of the State
Mm-hmm.
Department, and I was unwilling to tolerate those incessant meetings when I wanted to get stuff done, and if there was no output from the meeting, I didn't want to be there. And so I understand that I contributed to this, and I'm not saying that it was everybody's fault, but when the system came down on me, there was a lot of things that were done and said that were absolutely not true, but I ended up bearing the consequences for this. And and it was hard. And I think, I don't want to bring religion into it, but I finally, it was my faith and my
Sure.
understanding of what I was here on earth for, and my understanding of how my relationships with other people fit in. And just that prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, when I read that, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. And it talked about the things that needed to be done to make this world a better place. And then down a few lines, it said, in pardon we are pardoned. And I just realized then that this wasn't about making the system square and
No.
making things right again.
No.
It was about me taking the initiative to move forward. And I think sometimes we need to help even our employees work through this. And we need to make sure we understand failure in a way where we can be empathetic and we can help people work through these, because there are a lot of people around in the relationship, through a divorce or whatever the situation is, where there's broken people. And if you can make things work out better so that people can get through these just devastating experiences, uh, with an understanding of perspective and that big picture, sort of goes back to that
Yep.
initial thing we talked about, that really in the big scheme of things, whether I was the ambassador or not probably didn't matter, because I
Yeah.
went on to help. We built schools, we put in water projects, and we channeled this pent up anger into projects that were positive. And the people we've been able to help since then, by taking the focus away from being the ambassador to being a doer and to making a difference in people's lives, as opposed to going to work in a nice armored car, this is probably brought me more joy and more satisfaction than some of these other programs. Now, I still wish that I didn't have to live through this.
Sure.
And in fact, is all these situations that have changed me. I said, I wouldn't want to relive that 30 seconds over San Antonio. I wouldn't want to have everything taken from us when we evacuated from Congo. I wouldn't want to be in the Pentagon where 186 people had their dashes closed out at 9:36 a.m. I wouldn't want to live through this experience where I was basically hit with a baseball bat on the side of my head and my head was spinning and it took me a while to recover. I wouldn't want to relive that, but I'm certainly grateful for the lessons of all
Sure.
these experiences, because I'm a better person, I'm a better leader, I'm a better follower and a better manager, but I'm more happy that I'm a better leader because I can make a difference in the lives of those I interface with on a daily basis.
I think that's a great lesson. And one of the things around it is that, in my work and what I do is there's an old saying, people are doing the best they can with what they know. I don't know if I fully agree with that, but what I do understand is everybody's trying to feel better.
Mhm.
Everybody's just trying to feel better, and so they're trying to do what they think will make it or them better. And sometimes that's incredibly derogatory and damaging. But sometimes there's, in the context of that, there's also a betrayal. You retired, you offered your resignation, and it was accepted by the person you advised and who was your friend, which was President Obama, I believe.
Mhm.
Let me rephrase that. It's not true. I don't know it to be true. I believe that you were friends with Obama and that you were advised him and you actually had to hand your resignation to him. Is that correct?
Yeah, indirectly, it went up through
Yeah,
the State
of
Department,
course.
but there was a confluence of a lot of things. There was an election going on, and it was very difficult for anybody to step in and change the Inspector General uh, conclusion,
Ah,
because you would be accused of nepotism or favoritism and that kind of thing. That said, I had 4 messages that came from the White House directly from him that said he understood, he was sorry, and that kind of thing. But given, that I probably couldn't be saved in this situation because
Mhm.
of the election that was going on.
I
This
see.
was happening right in 2012 in the heat of the election, and I understood that, and I'm big enough to understand that I'm not in the sphere that he was operating in at that time, and there's people that that have to go and do things that they might not want to do, but that's just the system, and I'm fine with that. And
Is it with a fair context to say you were friends?
yeah, let me just explain this a little bit. In my last assignment in the military, I was director of plans and policy and strategy for 94 countries of
Wow.
Europe, of Africa, and I used to have to come back and brief Congress a lot on what we were doing. And then Senator Obama was not interested in what we were doing. He said, "Why are we doing it?" And I
Hmm.
was really intrigued with his thought process.
Hmm.
And in fact, uh, when he found out I was from Africa, that I speak Swahili and as my native language and all that stuff, he said, "You're more African than I am, and my dad was a Kenyan." And I said, "Right." He said, "When I go to Africa, I want you to take me there with me
Uh,
and go with me." And I said, "Yeah, right." And then I get this telephone call and says, Barack Obama is ready to go to Africa. And I said, "Yeah, right." And anyway, it turns out that we went and we spent 15 days together and flying together in the front of the airplane. It was a military aircraft and doing things together. And we got to know each other.
hmm.
And I would say, I would characterize it from my response, my end, that we became good friends. And and then when he decided to run, I even though I was a Republican, I ended up saying national security and foreign policy is not Republican, Democrat, they're American issues,
Yeah,
and I'll be happy to help out with foreign policy and national security, which I did.
right.
And then when he won, I went to basically the transition team and worked these same issues again for the transition team. And then because he kept Secretary Gates in the as our defense minister or Secretary of Defense, because we were in 2 wars,
Hmm.
it didn't make any sense for a Republican secretary to fill the slots that are called the plum book and the cherries and the
Hmm.
political appointees. So President Obama asked me to fill these slots and work with Secretary Gates. And so I went into personnel. And then when Sudan went sour, I was asked to go over and be the special envoy to try to fix that problem. And we had 24 consecutive miracles, and we were able to stop the war in Darfur. We were able to accomplish what the comprehensive peace agreement did not do in the last 4 or 5 years, and we were able to implement that. And so it was and then of course have the referendum, the national elections, and so it was very successful, very rewarding, and I'm very grateful for my time in government.
That's very cool. Now, you were doing all that when Al Shabaab, Al Qaeda, the links, uh, Boko Haram, all those were sort of not only surfacing but were huge. Um,
Yes.
what was that like for you? And what are we? Do you think we're? Do you think we understand that today? I mean, because it seems to me like there's a lot of, oh, that's done, move along.
Mm. Deb, I would say I've been very blessed to have been in the Cold War and the transition to what we call peace, and then the transition into this terrorism thing, and
Hmm.
to watch it. And I think, in my view, the thing that we really didn't grasp is that we started going after individual terrorists as opposed to the root of the problem. and
Hmm.
and we'll run out of bullets before we will be able to get rid of all the terrorists and potential terrorists. But when you really look at Africa's problems and the problems in the Middle East, there's a social economic component that we have to take seriously.
Thank
And
you.
it's not just um, a political or a national security thing or, shoot 'em up. It's solving the basic things that cause people to say, I would rather lose my life than continue where I'm going right now. And so for me, I tried to bring this other component in to try to make a difference in the lives of people, to try to let them have hope, to let them be in a situation where their kids can grow up to live a life that is peaceful and successful and healthy. And until we really start understanding that this is a fragile ecosystem where we have to grapple with migration and pollution and economics and all those other issues, because global issues require international solutions.
Yes.
Now it's fun to say we can build walls around our country and be isolationists and make ourselves great again, all that stuff.
Well, if that's
And
what you call fun, I'm on a different boat.
yeah,
I'm
well, I
shipping
mean,
out to a whole other direction.
well, my point is that I understand how,
Yeah, I
that
get it.
can be
It's easy.
attractive to some folks.
Sure.
And but the reality is that while you're doing that, you also have to understand that you live in the global village, that we're all subject to the same weather patterns, we're all subject to the same economic pressures, we're all subject to the requirement to have food every once in a while, we're all the requirement to keep our kids healthy and to provide them with the education they need to get ahead. And whether you're an African, South American, or an American, you have those same needs. And
Yes.
we sometimes blow it off and say, if you don't think like us, then you're on this side. And if you think like us, you can be on our side. And it just doesn't work that way. And until we understand the big picture and start bringing in social economic together with national security and foreign policy, then we won't win. And I think some of our strategies have been bankrupt because they've not been holistic.
I think that's such a great point and such an important point, because I would say there are many things that cause wars, but a big part of that is the ability to dehumanize by othering. And we say
Yes.
that they are the other. They're not like us. They're not our faith. They're not our nationality. They don't believe in these things. Well, these are people who are fighting for a cause. And if you're a soldier who signed up because you're patriotic, or a military person who signed up because you're patriotic, you're fighting for a cause. Now, you can say the cause is your country, and I understand that, but the chances are that you probably went in there for a cause. And oftentimes the cause was not your country, it was the cause of your family who was socially or economically struggling in middle America. And you went, I can get a job and I can get an education by joining the military. And that's what you went and do. And when you start othering another nation, you forget that those people in those wars are also the same. You know,
Right.
it's so important for us to realize that what something seems to be is not often what it is, and that most people are manipulated into situations through the socioeconomic lens that's got nothing to do with military, got nothing to do with war, got nothing to do with even political stance. It's got everything to do with wanting something better. And so when we look at Cuba and we look at, I'm old enough, or I remember when I was a kid, people who were a little older than me, maybe 5 years older than me, wore t-shirts with Che Guevara on. Che Guevara was a revolutionary. Now, we were much like the millennials of today who are seeing socialism as a good thing. We didn't understand the full context of it, but we understood that there were people who were fighting for something better, for living a shitty life, and they wanted something better. And it doesn't matter whether it's Che Guevara or Castro, or whether it was the Russian Revolution, or whether it's something happening in South America today, or something happening in the Middle East. The people who are behind these things are manipulating the most people who are just saying, we want a loaf of bread. We want our kids to have a decent life. And I think that oftentimes, if we bring that back now and say, as leaders of our companies and our organizations, we can say, well, we're providing jobs. And it's a lot like you were saying about them saying, you haven't allocated the funds. So what? You're providing jobs. So what? Well, we've cut away unemployment. Yeah, you've cut away unemployment, but you have people working at less than an amount of money they can live on. So they don't actually, so they have to work 3 jobs. They're going on 3 hours sleep a night. This is not unemployment. This is a social economic situation. And when you are a multi-billion dollar organization and you're not paying your people $15 an hour, as an example, I'm not saying that's the right or wrong number, you can't expect people to be loyal because they don't really know that you give a crap about them. And I love that you keep bringing it back to that, Scott. That's why I wanted to show both sides of where you've been, because you bring it back to this piece about the humanity. You bring it back to this piece about being a servant leader, and that you're here to serve. I'm a servant leader. And, again, as you're listening to this, watching this, you might be thinking, servant leader, isn't that Christian? No, it's not. There are many Christian leaders who are servant leaders, but there are also many Hindu leaders who are servant leaders, many Buddhist leaders who are servant leaders, many Muslim leaders who are servant leaders. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's got to do with this understanding that I'm here to serve something bigger than me, something bigger than my idealism, that problem can't be solved with power over. And so often in leadership, that's what we're trying to do. And we get the badges and the accolades. Oh, well, you gave $1 million, or you created 5,000 jobs. Yeah, 5,000 shit jobs that nobody actually has any sense of decency about themselves about.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying there, Dov. And let me just bring up one other point. When you get to know people as people, your decisions are different. When I became the special envoy, the first thing I did is I took a group from the South, the leaders, and a group from the North. These people had been fighting each other for 40 years, 2 generations. And we went to a room and we said, all right, let's go around the room and tell me about your children. That's all I want to know about. Tell me about your family and your children. Until one, they went around the table, and pretty soon we figured out that we all had children, and we all cared about our children. We all wanted our children's future to be better than today. And we all knew that missing out on education, starving, and all those things, the planting seasons and healthcare, was not the way to go for our children and our future. And it was when people got to know each other as individuals and began to internalize the human issues that we all face. And when you see a mama holding her kid, it doesn't matter if she's black or white or brown or whatever color,
striped, it wouldn't make a difference.
Loves her child. And when you hear men talk about their offspring, it was such a moving experience. I'm not going to say there was tears in people's eyes, but the reality was that set the tone for a negotiation that broke loose a war and a lot of other issues. And it started because we humanized and we realized the basic thing we have in common is not our fight, but ourselves, our emotions, our intellect, our feelings, our families, all those things. We're so alike when we start breaking it down like that. And we're so different when we start talking about tribes and policies and other Mickey Mouse stuff. But when we bring it back to the reality of life, we are identical.
Couldn't agree more. That is a fabulous place to finish before I ask you my last 2 questions, because that was profound and important. My first question is one piece of practical advice, one thing that a leader can go away from this program today, go away and implement, that will allow them to take what it is that you've shared with us, which is extraordinarily valuable, and put it into action? What would be, if you had to say, okay, you just need one piece of practical advice, go do this today, what would it be?
I'd say look around yourself and figure out what you can be thankful for. What can you have gratitude about? And it's not about you. And you'll figure out that the things that give you gratitude are the things you have no control over. I mean, it's the beauty. It's maybe a relationship or whatever else. And I sometimes figure out, what can I be grateful for today? And whether it's a bird singing or whether it's something else, find that thing that you're grateful for. And it's not about you. You get bigger. Just be grateful for life, for opportunities, and realize that most of us as leaders, we were lucky. I mean, I was a White House fellow with President Reagan. I was all these other wonderful things. I was a lucky guy. And it wasn't because I deserved it. It was because I was there and I took advantage of an opportunity, but I was very fortunate, and I'm deeply grateful for the things that I have no control over.
I love it. I love that. Thank you, Scott. Scott, this has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you, sir. As I said, Scott Gration is the author of the unique and inspirational memoir, Flight Path, Son of Africa to Warrior-Diplomat. He's a retired Major General and Ambassador. Scott, before we finish, please, I would love for you to tell our audience where they can find out more about you and all your wonderful resources, and including the book, of course.
Well, the book is for sale at bookstores and obviously Amazon, and even by contacting me directly, I can give you an autographed copy, or actually sell you an autographed copy. But also at the website that you gave out earlier, scottgration.com, there's a little bit about the book, and I'm in the process of revamping that a bit. And so stand by for changes, but be yourself, be grateful, and keep your priorities.
Fabulous. And as Scott said, if you simply go to scottgration.com, of course, we'll put that address in the show notes. And remember, you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode that you've been listening to, or any past episodes inside of our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. Doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, or as an executive advisor, go to dovbaron.com. That's DOVBARON.com. Because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious. Again, about, well, not only what the difference between what's right and doing the right thing, but also about what you can be grateful for that you have no control over. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.